He is the only fairy that I will stand for. And notice how he never has to brag that he has a big D. It's all about showing, not telling. It's the end of 2023, which means I want to tell you the best books that I read this year. And in the next video, I'll also tell you the worst books that I read this year. And we all know that more people are going to click on that video. We also know that for the rest of the year, people are going to ask, why do you always read books that you hate? Do you like any books at all? And this video is proof that yes, I do. You just don't click on these types of videos enough. That's on you. I went through all the books I have read in 2023 and I have compiled the top 5 books, plus a bonus favorite, but I'm not going to include that in the ranking because technically I reread the book, but I know a few people are new to this channel, and because the book is still pretty damn good, I'm gonna go ahead and refer back to it anyway. Some of these books on the list are also books that I haven't discussed on this channel yet, just because I'm very behind when it comes to editing my monthly wrap-up videos. So this will be the first time that I actually talk about some of these books here. One of the best feelings that you can get is finding a good book and being totally comfortable, snuggling up and reading your book and just relaxing and enjoying your time. In those cases, it's so important to accessorize with a comfy blanket, a nice big couch, and also comfy underwear, which brings me to today's sponsor. Cue the clip from Future Cindy. This is gonna be TMI, but I don't care. I've been needing brand new underwear because my old ones have been looking nasty. When Parade approached me for the sponsor, I was super excited to try out their products, and I wanna show you my favorite pieces that I got from them. One of the biggest problems I have with underwear in general is that they are not breathable, and as someone who sweats profusely when it comes to the humidity, my coochie down there is like a swamp. So what I really like about this is that the fabric is very light and airy. It's almost like it's not even there, and so my cooch just feels so much better wearing this. And speaking of being too hot and sweaty, I've also been looking for a bralette that I can wear underneath like a t-shirt. I got this vintage scoop bralette here, and it's exactly what I'm looking for because it definitely works as a top, but it still functions as a bra, and it's super comfortable. It's 100% cotton. And then definitely the cutest piece that I got is the vintage high cut brief. I love that I can feel comfortable while also feeling cute at the same time. If you would like to check out the underwear and bralettes that they have, you can go to yourparade.com/Cindy40 and use Cindy40 for 40% off site-wide. And now let's continue the video. All right, so let's get cozy and start talking about the favorite books that I read this year. So what I have done is, again, I went through a list of all the books I read and I decided to rank them from my favorite of all time this year to the least favorite, but still like a favorite of mine. Like, they're all good in my opinion, but I just thought it'd be fun to rank them, and I'm gonna go backwards so that I can save the very best for last. Before we get into the list, I also want to share the bonus book that I reread for people who are new to this channel and may not know some previous favorites that I have read before. So the book that I reread this year was This Is How You Lose the Time War. I normally do not reread books, but Victoria had gifted it to me for my birthday because she knew that I really loved the book and she wanted to annotate it with her thoughts as she read it for the first time. I actually had no clue whether she would like it or not. The thing about this book, I think it's a hit or miss for people. A very common thing that people say about this book is that they have no idea what is going on. And I too, similarly, do not know what is going on, but I still loved it at the same time because the writing was so damn good. So this is basically a sci-fi novella. The majority of the book is written through the form of letters. These letters are passed back and forth between two time-traveling agents. They are spies on the opposite sides of the war. And what I thought was really interesting was that rather than explain exactly what was happening in the plot or what war was going on, it was much more focused on the characters building a relationship that they have with each other. It starts with one of the agents tricking another agent, and she leaves a letter behind to taunt the other one. And this is what starts the pen pal rivalry between them, but then they start to learn more about each other. They share their deeper vulnerabilities that they aren't able to do otherwise. Every time you read a letter, you see them travel to some specific time period, to some specific location, and even the way that a letter is acquired is very creatively done. Like, there's this one letter where she carves the entire letter in the rings of a tree after you chop it off, which would have taken hundreds of years to do. And this is how you know these are lesbians, because only lesbians would have the tenacity for this shit. And when they fall for each other, they fall so hard. Like, these become love letters at this point. They declare their whole lives to each other, and which again is a very lesbian move. Like, they might as well pull up the U-Haul truck at this point. Out of all of the books I have ever read, if I could choose choose one book where I could replicate the writing style effortlessly and naturally, this would be the book. Each sentence is crafted so well, and I don't know how they do it. I'm gonna share one of the romantic lines in the book. It says, I love you, I love you, I love you. I'll write it in waves, in skies, in my heart. You'll never see, but you will know. I'll be all the poets. I'll kill them all and take each one's place in turn. And every time love's written in all the strands, it will be to you. This bitch literally said she will kill every single poet just to prove her love for the other girl. Like, she is down bad. Speaking of lovey-dovey things, this leads me to the start of my list. Again, we are gonna go backwards here so that the very last book will be my favorite of the year. This one in particular was actually the first book I ever read in 2023, and that is called Be Not Afraid of Love. This is a nonfiction book. It's a collection of essays written by a non-binary Asian author who was a survivor of intimate partner abuse. That kind of physical and emotional violence that they dealt with made them reconfigure everything that they knew about love. They really emphasize how even though you've been through trauma and violence and been broken, you should still, as the title says, not be afraid of love. And you should lean into that softness and care for yourself, for the people in your life, and for the world around you. The author also brings up this interesting intersection between love and fear and how that affects everything from your self-esteem to your friendships to your romantic relationships. I like that this person really analyzed love on a grander scale and not through the lens of a romantic relationship. I think one of the things that I dealt with when I also went through a toxic relationship was having to evaluate my own self-worth, because part of the reason why I ended up in such a bad relationship in the first place was because I didn't have much of an identity for myself or any love for myself, and I was kind of looking towards another person to fill in that gap, but that person was not a very good person for that. And obviously I still to this day have a lot to work on. So for example, even though I have a lot of love for my girlfriend, I do not have any love for myself. I'm pretty much my number one hater. I'm very mean to myself. I don't practice any gentleness or kindness to myself. A very common thing that therapists and other people will say is this talk about healing your inner child, but I don't even feel anything for my inner child. Like, I don't care about that punk ass kid. So I still have a lot to learn. But in the beginning of this year, as is the beginning of every year really, I tend to view the new year as like a new slate, and I feel more inspired to get my life together. And one of the things I really wanted to do in the beginning of 2023 was to really embrace love and be kinder to myself. So when I read this book, it just came at a really perfect time. I really appreciated how tender and sincere and nourishing the book was. And one of the things that it had encouraged me to do was to feel things more deeply, because I was the kind of person that would often reject emotions, probably because most of the time when I feel emotions, they're negative emotions, and I would cast judgment on them, and I would feel ashamed or that I failed again because I wasn't happy. Being open to those things and just tying it back to love was important for me, and something that I had to realize from this book. However, the reason why I'm putting it last on this list, I still think it's a good book, but here's the thing. I had all these ambitions to be a more loving person, but lo and behold, this year was personally one of the shittiest years of my life, and I have fallen so hard into self-loathing and the bad habits I have all over again. So I have not practiced anything that this book has preached. I still think it's a good book, but I wonder if I were to read it now after I have been beaten and bruised so badly from life this past year, would I feel the same? Would it resonate with me the same way? Probably not. But I do think it's the kind of book that I would recommend to people who need it. If you are the kind of person who collects crystals, you would like this book. You have to be a very hippie kind of spiritual person to be into it. I'm not, but again, I was very weak and vulnerable in the beginning of the year, so I was susceptible to the book's charms. I'm gonna read out loud an excerpt so you get an idea. If we befriend only what feels good, we alienate our hurt. When we are judged by others and ourselves for weeping about separation, heartbreak, trauma, tragedies, accidents, and death, we push vital parts of ourselves away. When sorrow is seen with self-judgment, it can generate a great sense of fragmentation within. Suppressing our sadness can grow into a cruel cynicism, making us scared of our own feelings and doubtful of the fullness of life. Yeah, this page basically read me for filth, because very quickly I have already been shrouded in cruel cynicism. You know what's not so gentle though? The next book I'm gonna share, which is Bright Young Women. I have not talked about this book on my channel yet. I approached this thinking it was gonna be a thriller book, but it was just so much more. It's honestly not even really a thriller. When you look at it on a surface level, it seems like it would be, because it's inspired by the real life sorority murders that happened by a very famous American serial killer. Ted Bundy comes to mind for this, but there are so many serial killers out there who have become famous just for their gruesome crimes. So this book follows two women on opposite sides of the country, but they are connected through these murders. The first woman is a sorority leader who woke up in the middle of the night because the serial killer came into the sorority house and killed a bunch of the women there. She ends up being the only person who gets to see his face. The other perspective that we get to see is this other young woman who has lived a very sheltered life. She forms a connection with another woman, and their relationship is really sweet to see as well, especially to see this particular woman like come out of her shell after having been so oppressed by her mother for so long. But unfortunately, she becomes one of the victims of this serial killer as well. So her partner that she had been with devotes the rest of her life to finding the killer who's still on the loose. And so when that partner finds out about the sorority girl killings, she knows that he is involved too. And this is how you start to see their stories get intertwined as they both decide to pursue the truth and take this mofo down. I also appreciate how in the book, he is never named at all. He's called the defendant the entire time because giving him a name just adds an unnecessary spotlight to him when we have already put unnecessary spotlights on so many serial killers out there. It really was more about the women's stories and their uphill fight to try to get justice for the other women that they've lost in their lives. And it did such a good job of showing how these famous American serial killers are not brilliant or charismatic or handsome, but in fact, they're just ugly, stupid losers. Like there's so many parts in the book where the writing just says straight up that he's fucking ugly or dumb. And the only reason why they've gotten away with these crimes is because of incompetent law enforcement and sexism. And the reason why they are seen as masterminds and completely brilliant is because of how media coverage wants to sensationalize this. This is what works well for the police as well, because they don't want to look incompetent. So they gotta make it seem like the person that they're up against is such an enigma. And we know this to be true in real life too, because there are accounts of these famous serial killers where people are like, actually, this guy wasn't handsome. This guy wasn't charismatic. He was clearly a creep. Many of these men were able to lure their victims by pretending that they were injured and they needed a good Samaritan to help them, not because they were successful in flirting with her or tricking her. I thought it was just such an accurate depiction of men who think that they are so brilliant and smarter than they actually are. And in reality, so many of the people around them have to cater around his ego while doing the actual work in the first place. And the book calls it out over and over again because you're seeing this through the perspective of these really smart women. And I love how the book didn't hold back on that. Like even a flashback scene where one of the victims had been approached by this guy and he was trying to flirt with her. It was so obvious that he was this awkward dude, but she was just trying to be nice and responsive to him anyway and just go along with it, which is the case for many women in real life who have to kind of go along with any random dude that approaches them because you don't want to be a bitch to them or you don't want to accidentally trigger them to do something wild. Here's a quote that I really liked. "I've tried to make sense of how someone who didn't stalk his victims in advance ended up going after the best and the brightest. And I think that's it. The thing they all had in common, a light that outshone his. He targets college campuses and sorority houses because he's looking for the cream of the crop. He wants to extinguish us. We are the ones who remind him that he's not that smart, not that good looking, and there's nothing particularly special about him." Ugh, this book is so good. Maybe I should put it higher on my list. Honestly, these rankings are arbitrary. All of the books here are good. I think this one in particular, like if you are someone who is well versed with true crime or you don't like the way that true crime depicts a lot of these real life stories of these victims and these awful people, then I think you would really resonate with the themes of this book. Speaking of women who have been taken advantage of, that leads to the next book that I enjoyed called A Study in Drowning. This is the first young adult dark academia book that I actually enjoyed. I was so convinced for the longest time that I was gonna rate this 3 stars because it was so slow and I was getting kind of bored with it, but then the last 1/3, it just really brought everything all together and I kept on thinking, shit, this author really pulled off a good job here. So the premise of this is that the main character is this girl who's always believed in fairy tales because a long time ago she had an incident with the fairy king. It's a really scary ordeal, but the general perception is that she's just cuckoo because the Fairy King is not a creature that actually exists. So she actually has to take these pills to ward off those visions that she has of him. Because of this background story though, she is really attached to this classic epic tale about a modern girl who falls in love with the Fairy King, because when she read that book, it really validated the experience that she went through. So she has admired this author for the longest time. Unfortunately, the author has passed away already because it was a really old book. However, the author's family decides to announce a contest for students to redesign the dead author's manor. And the main girl's like, oh my god, this is perfect for me because I'm an architecture major and I'm the biggest fangirl for the author. So in this book, we follow her staying at the author's estate, which is a very crusty place. Like, it's basically in shambles, falling apart. But that's what happens when you read a dark academia book that's very atmospheric. You end up in a janky ass place, but the writing describes it very beautifully because it's supposed to be about the atmosphere and the vibes. There's also another dude there who she considers to be her academic rival, especially because the only reason he's there is because he believes that the author didn't actually write the book. And so he has this ulterior motive to pretend that he gives a shit about this contest so that he can expose the guy as a fraud. So this pisses off the main girl even more because she's like, oh my god, how dare you say that about my childhood hero? And so the entire book is about these two characters starting to piece together the clues about this mysterious guy's legacy. And there's some magical elements that get brought into this as well. Again, I really thought that I was gonna give this 3 stars because it was so slow. I actually contemplated dropping it for a while, but the climax ate. It was so good. Like the last 1/3, the author really put her author Russie into writing this because so many of the lines were gorgeous, especially when you start to see the shambles of this place get even more decrepit. By the time you really get to the end of the book, I thought the way that the author pieced together the themes were really well done because there was this theme about women reclaiming their stories. And this was paralleled in the history of certain events that happened before the main characters existed, as well as the main girl's own story too. I also like the main girl's character development because she felt like a very solid, fully fleshed out character. Because of the various things that she's gone through, she's really had to fight to survive for her life. One quote that I highlighted says, "That was the cruelest irony. The more you did to save yourself, the less you became a person worth saving." This is basically talking about how she's done a lot of morally great things in an effort to preserve herself and to survive. And I thought it was really interesting to point out the irony that when you do those morally great things, maybe you're not a person worthy of surviving in the first place because you are kind of throwing away your goodness as a human being for that. Something that's prevalent throughout the book as well is this metaphor of women and water, which I thought was really interesting. One quote says, "We must discuss then the relationship between women and water. When men fall into the sea, they drown. When women meet the water, they transform. It becomes vital to ask, is this a metamorphosis or a homecoming?" Water was always a prevalent theme from the beginning of the story, and even to the climax when you could really see how water was such like a brutal force where the characters are trying to like survive this big giant climax happening. This is a very solid standalone, so I'm surprised that it jumped up to one of my top books for this year. Speaking of women reclaiming their stories, you know who has really done a great job at reclaiming the publishing industry? The Reylos. That is why they have taken the #2 spot on my best books list with You Again. I've never even seen Star Wars. I'm pretty sure I wouldn't even ship Reylo, but there's just something about these Reylo authors that are writing these books that make me really eat it up. And in particular, You Again has become my favorite romance book of all time because I ate this shit up from the very beginning that I read it. It feels like the perfect modern day New York City rom-com. The book centers around the main girl who is a commitment phobe. She's very free-spirited. She doesn't want to be tied down to a relationship. She never sleeps over after hooking up. She just likes to keep things casual. The main guy, on the other hand, takes relationships very seriously. He's a hopeless romantic. And what piqued my interest for picking up this book is that they clash in the beginning of the story because they find out that both of them are sleeping with the same girl. The book takes place over 10 years, and I just really love seeing the characters banter with each other and seeing them clash heads with one another because their values in life are so different. It made me so curious about how these two could possibly be friends. So I love seeing their strange friendship start to blossom. I love that it didn't start off as romantic and that it was platonic. And I had so much fun reading this book because it was funny. I laughed a couple of times because of the main girl and her crude humor. Very much similar in line to mine. And so that kind of dynamic with the main guy, who is is very no nonsense, curmudgeonly. It was really fun to see. It was also very sweet once you start to get into their emotions. It was also heartbreaking because of the conflicts that would happen later. It was also hot because of the smut scenes as well. It just had everything. And it also had place in New York, and as someone who recently moved here, I just loved how it wholeheartedly embraced all the weird, quirky stuff that would happen in the city. So this is really the kind of book that I think would be so perfect as an actual rom-com movie. And I love relationships that just span over years because it just extends the whole yearning and it builds up to seeing what happens with their relationship later. The ending really got me in my feels. It makes me want to just fall in love in New York City. There are quite a few moments that take place during the New Year's too, so I do think it is a great New Year's book to check out. It just has everything: comedy, heartbreak, romance, sexy times. What more can you ask for when it comes to a rom-com? One of the quotes I highlighted says, "Maybe there's no such thing as soulmates. Maybe there are only people who trust each other enough to begin something without being assured of the end." After Ali Hazelwood and now really falling in love with this book, I'm just so ready to read all the other Reylo books that are coming out. All the authors are friends with each other anyway. Like literally Ali Hazelwood blurbed "you again," which should have been the first time for me already, because when I picked up this book, I had no idea that it was Reylo until like when someone pointed out to me. I should just assume that every tall guy in a book that has black hair is based off of Adam Driver. Not interested in the actor at all, but whenever people write a fictionalized version of him, they just make the romance so much juicier. So I'm gonna be unofficially joining the Reylos here, because even though I probably don't care for the ship in real life, then about these books, I don't know what they sprinkle in there, but I'm eating this shit up. And then the last book that I'm gonna talk about, which is the #1 spot for me, is gonna be Emily Wilde's Encyclopaedia of Faeries. The only reason why I picked it up was because it was chosen for one of the book clubs that I'm in. A friend that started the book before me said that she felt like she was going through vocabulary lessons, which made me nervous because I am not a smart person. I cannot read dense fantasies, so I was worried that I wouldn't be able to get through this. But fortunately, even if the information is kind of dense sometimes, particularly when the book has footnotes. By the way, anytime a book has footnotes, I know that's like a stylistic choice now, but I just know the author is flexing an information dump that they can get away with, and I just know it ain't gonna be my thing. However, this book is different. It was still highly enjoyable despite the more academic approach to the writing. It makes sense given the context of the story. It is basically about a professor who goes on a journey to a small town in order to work on her research about fairies. Her specialty is studying fairy folklore. This is something that is considered weird to other people because not everyone believes in it, but she is really invested in this to the point where she is willing to go all the way far up north where it's cold as hell. She can barely start a fire on her own, and she's not getting along with other people in the town either, because even though she is a very intelligent academic, she doesn't have great people skills. This is where the main guy comes into the story. He is a rival professor at the same university who just decides on his own whim to join her so that they can combine their research together. This annoys her greatly because he's the guy who can charm everyone, and he's very flippant and he just does whatever he wants, which is very frustrating for her because she's set in her ways. However, she decides to tolerate his presence anyway because she is convinced that he actually is a fairy himself. So her ulterior motivation to tolerating him and letting him collaborate with her is that she'll be able to have a better intimate understanding of fairies by literally working alongside a fairy. This book was so unexpectedly fun and charming. I think the moment that the guy enters the story, I just knew we were gonna have such a fun time because the dynamic between the two characters is so delightful to read. Their personalities balance each other really well. They bicker with each other a lot, but at the same time you can tell he really respects her and admires her. And I also love how the main girl is able to literally think her way out of situations throughout the book. Like if she's in danger, rather than relying on any physical strength, which she doesn't really have, she uses her brains instead because she is so well researched and meticulous when it comes to fairy folklore that she knows certain tricks to be able to barter with a fairy or get out of a sticky situation. I also like that her motivations are a little bit morally gray because, for example, if certain villagers are in danger, she wants to rescue them, but it's not necessarily because she cares for their well-being, it's because it's all for the research. Like that's her #1 priority in her life. However, the main guy really validates her because if it were just him, he wouldn't give a fuck either way. Like literally, he'll just casually kill a bunch of people without blinking an eye. So I kind of like that he has such little disregard for other people people, but when it comes to the main girl, I can tell he's getting attached. One of the moments that I really enjoyed was when he was a little bit drunk and he said, "I prefer your company, M." He said it as if it were obvious. I snorted again, assuming he was teasing me. Over the company of a tavern filled with a rapt and grateful audience? I'm sure you do. Over anyone else's company? Again, he said it with some amusement, as if wondering what I was doing speculating about something so evident. "You were drunk," I said. "Shall I prove it to you?" "No, you shan't," I said, alarmed, but he was already sweeping to the floor, bending his knee and taking my hand between his. "What in God's name are you doing?" I said between my teeth, "and why are you doing it now?" "Shall I make an appointment?" he said, then laughed. "Yes, I believe you would like that. Well, name the time when it would be convenient for you to receive a declaration of love." "Oh, get up," I said, furious now. "What sort of jest is this, Wendell? You don't believe me?" He smiled, all mischief, a look I'd seen from other folk, enough to know not to trust him 1 inch. "Ask for my true name and I'll give it to you." "Why on earth would you do that?" I demanded, yanking my hand back. "Oh, he said forlornly, "you are the cleverest dolt I have ever met." I'll refrain from reading the rest of the passage, but it's just moments like these where I just feel my fangirl heart fluttering. He is the only fairy that I will stand for. And notice how he never has to brag that he has a big D. It's all about showing, not telling. And I'm also stoked that the second book is coming out soon in January. This book still works as a standalone, but I look forward to reading the rest of the series, however long it is. And I'm not a person who typically cares for a continuing series in the first place. Like, I have to actually really like a book for me to want to read the rest of the series. But for these characters, the author could write a dozen books of them going on all these different adventures for their research, and I would read every single one of them. It is so much fun. So that pretty much summarizes the best books that I read in 2023. I will see you next time for the worst books I have read for the year, and there are quite a few. I actually will probably have to narrow it down so that the video doesn't end up too long. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.
See me sliding in that old school, yeah, I ain't never asked for no favors, so if you ain't with me now, don't act like you was later. But when I leave, will you still support like the Raiders? Come with me, we gotta get to it, what we wait for?